at least what we do in the lab is when the first part, when he's presenting, is open. So you can see there's some lovely supporters here for his talk, and it's also being recorded.
It is.
People are joining, maybe.
Yep, I have one participant here. Mm-hmm.
Also, from our lab for other people that may want to see it. And once this presentation is over, then we ask everybody to leave. Very intimate. So, Brandon, do you want questions throughout, or would you prefer questions at the end?
Questions throughout are fine. If you want to interrupt me with questions, that's okay. Yep. And do you want mask or no mask? Okay. I do have a tickle in my throat, so I'll keep the mask on. Okay, so we get to talk about actors and fighters today. This is in partial fulfillment of the requirements for a Master's of Science degree in kinesiology with a thesis. So this is my thesis presentation. My program of study committee is here today. We have Dr. Elizabeth Stegemuller of kinesiology, specifically motor control, Mr. Brad Dell, who is the chair of the music and theater department, Dr. Jacob Meyer in kinesiology, exercise psychology, and Dr. Kira Werstein, kinesiology, exercise psychology. So first up, I want to put a little bit of context around stage combat. Now, scientific treatment of theater dates back to at least Aristotle's Poetics, 350 BC, where he laid out his 6 elements of theater. Now, he didn't like having the violence on stage. He was very much against that. He very much wanted to have the violence off stage, all of the upsetting things to happen off stage. We don't need to see that. However, other folks did want to see the violence on stage. So we had to come up with safe ways to do that so that the actors could repeat performances. So we weren't maiming them on stage, and we could do multiple performances of the same show. There is evidence of this in Pseudolus by Plautus, which is a Roman play about 200 years before year 0. We also have evidence in Shakespeare where he says we fight. We have some examples of what may be his fights and treatises by fight masters of the time that could indicate what those fights might have looked like. More recently, we see stage combat in Anonymous by Iizuka from 2007 and She Kills Monsters by King Wen. The BASSC up there is the British Academy of Stage and Screen Combat. They were established in 1969 to oversee the safe use of violence on stage. Their sister society, the Society of American Fight Directors, was founded in 1977. They have multiple levels, about 6 levels of membership with the society, ranging from friend of the society all the way up through fight master. And there are different requirements of training for each of those levels. We'll talk about that a little bit later when I talk about my participants. I want to talk a little bit about the literature around acting and martial arts. This is what I was able to draw from. There is no existing literature on stage combat in terms of a scientific treatment. This husband-wife team of Helga and Tony Noyce from Indiana. This was an experimental study in community-dwelling older adults. It's a short-term intervention to enhance cognitive and affective functioning in older adults. They put them through a theater training intervention versus a no treatment control and a fine arts intervention. And they found that the ones who went through the acting intervention saw benefits above and beyond the control groups, the control and comparator group. So we have some evidence that acting can be an effective way of promoting cognitive and affective health. In terms of martial arts, this is a study out of Germany. The effects of karate training versus mindfulness training on emotional well-being and cognitive performance in later life. They recruited older adults. This again was an experimental study where they had the experimental group went through a karate intervention, and the comparison group had a mindfulness training instead. So the thought here is that stage combat could perhaps combine these benefits and have an effective and efficient treatment to see these same sort of effects. However, we don't know yet. For this study specifically, I'm interested in health benefits of motor competence, cognition, and physical and mental health. There is some evidence that acting can promote motor competence. Actors are better at learning their dialogue if they have the movement along with it. So if they have their blocking, then they are better able to memorize their lines. We do know that motor competence has been associated with physical fitness. So the idea that someone has motor competence has been associated with them also having physical fitness. In terms of cognition, this study by Noyce and Noyce on the memory of actors showed that actors were better than a healthy comparison group at pulling the gist out of the lines than at verbatim. So they were about the same as the healthy controls on verbatim memory, but they were better at pulling the gist out of the lines and putting meaning into the words. Now, my long-term research goal is to create evidence-based guidelines for teaching and practicing stage combat. In our pyramid of the quality of evidence here, we have that lives in this light blue area right here, the evidence-based practice guidelines. In order to get there, we need to build up a base of support underneath. Each of these levels represents a clearer evidence toward cause and effect relationship. So right here at the top, we have the most evidence of a cause-effect relationship. And each level below it, we have experimental studies here, which could show a before and after, and observational studies that'll show you an association. Right now, the stage combat literature lives in this background information, the deep red at the base. So we have some space to fill up before we're able to get to that blue level. Each of these levels requires more time and resources, more commitment. So each jump up in a level needs to be justified by research in a lower level. So for this study, we're looking at an observational design. This was my original question: do active combatants' motor function, cognitive performance, and general well-being differ from those of martial artists and theater actors? So this would have been a cross-sectional study with active combatants as the population of interest and comparator groups of expert martial artists and expert theater actors. In terms of expertise here, the inclusion-exclusion criteria I was going to talk about. For active combatants, I recruited advanced active combatants. This is level 3 of the 6 in the society. These are folks who have probably been practicing for about 10 years in stage combat. There's really a minimum of, you could do it in 3, but it would be really hard. So most of these folks had quite a bit more experience than that. I spoke with Master Heyman here, who is our resident master martial artist, about what a good comparator group for martial artists would be, and he said that black belt martial artists would be comparable. And then for theater actors, I required 5 years of professional theater experience. So they would have, again, that 5 years of experience. They're well established and have some level of expertise. Right, I had fun images here for motor, cognitive, and well-being. Those will pop up again, okay? So in terms of recruitment, I sent out about 1,700 company letters. These are to studios, dojos, and theater companies across the 50 United States and the 5 inhabited territories in Washington, D.C. So all of the U.S. was involved here. Of those 1,700 that I sent out, these sort of cold call emails, I responded with an announcement with or without a poster. So I was able to send out 77 announcements in response to people who replied with interest to those company letters. In those announcements was a link for a screening survey through Qualtrics, an online survey platform. So then folks could click on that link and I could screen them and follow up for recruitment. I also sent that 330 number here is the advanced active combatants I contacted. I was able to pull their email addresses from the directory at safd.org. So I was able to directly contact the active combatants, which, as you'll see, was a better method of recruitment than maybe these cold call letters. From this, I was able to send out 117 acceptance letters and 12 thank you, but you didn't qualify for this study letters, and 51 data collections were scheduled. Some of those were reschedules. So we ended up with a total of 36 data collections, 5 actors, 7 martial artists, and this is the number to remember, 24 advanced African combatants. So these are the results from that cross-sectional data. You don't need to look too in depth to this. Just know that we ran these ANOVAs and found there was not statistical significance, mostly due to those small sample sizes, right? We didn't have a true comparison because we had such a big number of African combatants and such a small number of our comparison groups. So none of these results are likely to be close to the truth. We would need better recruitment to actually have these results. So from there, we adapted to overcome and changed the question to what are the predictors of motor function, cognitive performance, and general well-being in African combatants. And that time I got it. Okay, there we go. So the primary variables of interest were physical activity and stage combat experience. The idea with physical activity is that if they meet US guidelines, which is 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity a week, or 75 minutes of vigorous activity a week, or some combination of the two, plus 2 days or more of muscle strengthening activities, they would see health benefits. So the idea is up to a point, we do see this sort of level off at higher levels of physical activity, but they will be able to see health benefits because of physical activity. This was measured through the International Physical Activity Questionnaire. This is a subjective measure of physical activity. So participants remember back over the course of a week, and they are prompted to report on how much time they spent in moderate intensity physical activity and vigorous intensity physical activity across domains of transportation, work, and leisure time. This measure also captures sedentary behavior. In terms of stage combat experience, I captured years of experience, and that was our variable. The idea here is that experts would have realized the most possible training effects. Now, this isn't going to give us really, this isn't a true cause and effect relationship. This is an association, right? We don't know that these folks haven't been engaging in a bunch of other activities that conferred health benefits. But the idea here is that there's an association between expertise and training effects. So for the hypotheses, I hypothesized that physical activity and stage combat experience in terms of motor health would be positively associated with upper body muscular endurance. And I will break down each of these measures later on. Okay, I just want to put these hypotheses at the top. In terms of reaction time, we would see a negative association, a faster reaction time with more physical activity and stage combat experience. For cognitive health, their working memory would improve with more physical activity and stage combat experience. Visuospatial ability would also improve. Well-being, health-related quality of life would improve. Depressive symptoms would be lower, and perceived stress would be lower. So for the data collection, each participant joined me online through WebEx for 2.5 to 3 hours for a data collection. This started with informed consent. At the end of that was permission to record them. So recording didn't start until I had that permission. And then we went through the demographic and history survey through Qualtrics, that online survey platform, a physical warm-up, a 2-minute push-up test, then a 5-minute break in case they were winded from the push-up test. The reaction time tasks, movement-related memory tasks, and then they were back to the computer for the language-related memory tasks, spatial ability tests, and the well-being survey. For statistical analysis, I used Microsoft Excel for our summary statistics and SAS 9.4 to find Spearman's correlation coefficients, as well as those ANOVAs that I showed earlier. Now, we decided on Spearman's as this is a non-parametric treatment. So if the data is not normally distributed, then we treat it in this way to help to normalize the data and bring it closer to what may be a true association. Considering the small sample size, we assumed non-normality and ran Spearman's instead of Pearson's. I should note here that we did not control for multiple correlations in this analysis. So what we found in terms of demographics for this sample was an average age of about 32 years old. 29% were female, 16% reported Hispanic identity, 87.5% reported only white as their race. And we had a body mass index of 28.25 kilograms per meter squared. This would fall into an overweight category, which is normal for the US population. For physical activity, we saw a median physical activity of about 9,000 MET minutes per week. A MET is your resting metabolic rate. So if you're sitting here listening to me talk, you're probably using 1 MET. If you're up and walking around, you might use 3, and vigorous would be 5 or more MET minutes. Now the US guidelines are about 500 MET minutes a week. So this sample far and above exceeded the US guidelines by about 18 times here. In terms of sedentary behavior, they had an average of 7 hours a day of sedentary behavior. 83% reported that they were currently active in one or more of their movement disciplines. The average longest experience in any movement discipline reported was 16.5 years. Average stage combat experience was just over 10 years. And in terms of a subjective estimate of health, they reported 3 on a Likert scale out of 4. Things to note here, physical activity and stage combat experience were not associated. We have that high p-value, right? So a p-value less than 0.05 is statistically significant. We see here that the primary variables were not associated. The physical activity range that we saw was about 500 to 44,000 MET minutes per week reported here. So there's a wide range of physical activity seen. And the stage combat experience was 4 to 20 years. So we had a good range of stage combat experience reported in this sample. Let's talk about motor health. So motor health is the ability to physically move through, interact with, and manipulate the environment. To assess this, so physical fitness, we have those 5 components from the American College of Sports Medicine: body composition, muscular strength, muscular endurance, flexibility, and cardiorespiratory fitness. We went with muscular endurance for this, and we assessed this using a 2-minute push-up test. This is from the ACSM's protocols for the push-up test with an added 2-minute time limit. So they just do a maximal, so you go to exhaustion. I added a 2-minute time limit, so they weren't going forever. We did have very few participants actually make the full 2 minutes, just as a side note, but that was interesting. And then we also used reaction time, and you'll get a chance here to practice this, but they had reaction time to audible cues, and they tapped their hand on a desk. Afterward, I had to go back in Adobe Premiere Pro, video editing, and to measure their reaction time, right? So we had a recording, and then we lined it up to find what the reaction time was. So here's our chance to practice. So this is interactive. You can all get ready. This takes about 2 minutes. Folks online, you're going to want to pull up the link that's in the chat box here because the video doesn't always come through nicely on WebEx, okay? So go ahead and click on that link, and it's the exact same video. You might need to mute your WebEx and try that out. So here we go. It works in tech, I promise. There we go.
Is a contribution to science you're making. This is a test of your ability to appropriately respond to or withhold a response based on the sound you hear. When you hear this sound, you will tap the table with your outstretched hand like this. When you hear this sound, you will not tap the table. Please use your dominant hand when you tap the table. It is important that you use the same hand to tap the table each time. So if you are right-handed, always use your right hand to tap the table. If you are left-handed, always use your left hand to tap the table. Again, you will tap the table when you hear this sound. You will not tap the table when you hear this sound. To execute the tap, flick your wrist so you tap the desk in the same place your hand was resting. It's also important that you keep both hands on the table when you are not tapping. This way you will have a consistent starting point for each tap. Please take a few seconds to practice tapping the table with your dominant hand. Tap the table hard enough to make a sound your microphone can pick up, but not so hard that it becomes painful. You are welcome to pause this video and practice that now.
Both hands on the desk. There you go.
Please pause this video and ask the researcher any questions you might have.
All right, good job. Not everybody properly withheld that first one in the practice. The practice didn't apply toward the results, but good job. You did better than some of our participants. So the measures for motor health were the 2-minute push-up test, which I explained before, right? We start with our hands shoulder width apart, start on the ground in the down position, push up until the elbows are fully extended, back down until the chin touches the ground, and continue that until you cannot go any further, or your form deteriorates, or we reach the full 2 minutes. The simple reaction time was very similar to that choice reaction time task you just did, except you could respond to every tone. So it's the exact same tones that were heard, except they responded to all 20 of them instead of just the 10 lower tones. The simple and choice reaction time were based on work by Eckner and colleagues at the University of Michigan. They did a ruler drop task where they had some instrumentation attached. So the idea of the number of trials was taken from their protocol. So to remind you of our hypotheses for this domain, I thought that physical activity and stage combat experience would be positively associated with the upper body muscular endurance. So they'd do more push-ups, and the reaction time would be negatively associated. So they would be faster in their reaction time. What we found was an average of 30 push-ups in this sample. Now, to put this in context, the ACSM puts out categories of fitness from poor to excellent. If this sample were, doesn't matter if they were all men or all women, they would be in the excellent category based on the ACSM's guidelines here. However, if we compare it to the US Navy standards, this is a very physical culture where they have more expectations of training. If this was all men, they would be probationary, and if they were all women, they would fall into that good category for this age range. I need to set up this graph for you. I'm sorry to the folks in the room, the top is cut off. It's just a title. Should be fairly clear. But this is our Spearman's correlations. So this was put into a rank. So they're ranked from 1 to 24 for the push-ups and ranked from 1 to 24 for the physical activity. So you're not seeing how many push-ups they did. You're seeing their rank for the scale here. And what we found was that there was indeed a positive correlation here between physical activity and their push-up score at about 0.57. A perfect correlation is 1, so this is about halfway to a perfect correlation there, and we reached statistical significance. For stage combat experience, we did not find an association. So it didn't matter that they had more years of experience. This did not confer benefits on the push-up count, or it was not associated with benefits on the push-up count. In terms of simple reaction time, they had an average of 375 milliseconds. Remember that number just for the next slide, okay? 375. We did not find an association with physical activity or with stage combat experience for the simple reaction time. For choice reaction time, we had an average of 534 milliseconds, which is longer than the simple reaction time. This is good. This is promising because this is in agreement with the Hick-Hyman law, which is a well-established principle in kinesiology that choice reaction time is going to take more time than simple reaction time because there is an amount of cognitive processing that has to go on since they have to make a decision to respond or withhold the response. So it was good that our data agreed with this law of human physiology. We did not see an association with physical activity or with stage combat experience for choice reaction time. Lining up all of our associations here, So we have the 2-minute push-up, the simple reaction time, and choice reaction time lined up against all of our other variables. The green squares indicate statistical significance. Blue was trending toward statistical significance, so we had a p less than 0.1. And the purple is self-referential. So the 2-minute push-up and the 2-minute column and the 2-minute push-up row is shaded purple there. The little white dash through one of them means there was a negative association. Okay, the rest of them were positive associations. And I only did that for the ones that I colored in. Okay. All right, so we did see a trend towards significance in experience in yoga, Pilates, or some sport for the 2-minute push-up time. So if they had experience in those movement disciplines, they did a little better on the 2-minute push-up. This was just a trend. It was not a full association. We did see an association with the physical composite score, which I'll talk about later, and a trend toward a negative association with depressive symptoms. We saw associations between simple and choice reaction time. This is good. This is promising because, like I mentioned before, choice reaction time builds on simple reaction time, so they should be associated. The one I want to talk about on this slide is the physical activity. So we saw an association between 2-minute push-ups and physical activity. This study by Abigonkar and colleagues from 2012 looked at modern dancers, and they did not find this association. So even though the modern dancers were physically active, they did not have a benefit for the 2-minute push-up time. So it was not conferred to upper body muscular endurance, whereas in our sample of active combatants here, we do see that association. So there may be something about stage combat that encourages upper body muscular endurance, or at least encourages them to engage in activities that will improve that, even if it's not stage combat specifically. They do have to move heavy weapons around the stage in opposition to other people moving heavy weapons around the stage. So it makes sense that there would be some inclination toward building up that muscular endurance. So bringing back the hypotheses, we saw that upper body muscular endurance was associated with physical activity, but not stage combat experience. Reaction time was not associated with either. Let's talk about cognitive health. So cognitive health has to do with that brain-mind connection. Cognitive processes include language, perception, attention, memory, decision-making, emotion, motor skill learning, and problem solving. Among many others. Cognitive psychologists are coming up with more all the time. The ones I was specifically interested in were memory and visuospatial processing because of this model of working memory, originally conceived by Badley and Hitch, 1974. It was updated with the episodic buffer in 2000, and this is the newest representation of it by Darling and colleagues from 2017. So that central executive is the executive functioning that you might hear talked about, the prefrontal cortex. This is related to attention. So this is limited by attentional resources. And the central executive oversees task switching, working memory, and inhibition, among other things. The two big components here are the visuospatial sketchpad and the phonological loop. That phonological loop has to do with declarative memory. So being able to take in language and expound language and to think in terms of something that you can put to words. And the visuospatial sketchpad has to do with spatial relationships as well as movement, geometric relationships, those sorts of things. My idea here was that we would see benefits toward that visuospatial sketchpad, the visuospatial processing in our active combatants, because it is a of martial arts practice. And Boyer and Janssen here, 2017, this was a meta-analysis of correlational studies. They found that combat sports, martial arts, was associated with better performance on visuospatial ability tasks. So these folks engage in moving through space and spatial relationships with other combatants or other actors. So the idea here is that that would confer some benefit. In terms of memory overall, this memory span is what I want to talk about here. So Miller in 1955 established the magic number 7 plus or minus 2 that limits our memory span. This is why our phone numbers are 7 digits long. So like my childhood phone number was 682-2049, 7 digits, so that it's easy to remember. This was updated by Cohen in 2010 with the Magical Mystery 4. These guys had some fun with the titles. 4 plus or minus 1, that's the limits placed by the episodic buffer. So the episodic buffer, which handles multimodal or information, may limit further our memory span if there's lots of things going on, lots of information to process. So for these measures, I looked at movement-related memory, language-related memory, spatial orientation, and spatial visualization. These are all either directly taken from or adapted from the kit of factor-referenced cognitive tasks by Ekstrom et al. In 1976. So the digit span, which I've got an example of first off, was taken directly from that. So you get to practice again. For example, I might call out series 1, 7, 2, 4, begin. When I say begin, showing that the series is complete, repeat the numbers in this manner, 7, 2, 4. Let's practice. Series 1, 7, 2, 4, begin. Very good, very good. Now, then they were presented with 24 of these sequences, and those sequences were 4 to 12 digits long. So the best they could do is a 12-digit memory span based on this measure. The reverse memory then would be in the reverse. So instead of responding 724, when I say 724, you would respond 427. So you'd report it in the reverse. And this is to assess working memory as opposed to short-term memory by the forward span. The movement then span was based on this, except I replaced the digits 1 through 9 with gross motor movements. So we had 1, 2, 3, and 4 with the legs, 5 and 6, 7 was a lunge, 8 another lunge, and 9 was pushing the arm straight out. Okay, so 7 to 4 would have been 7 to 4 kind of thing. Okay, they had a time of training with that, up to 10 minutes, or when they said they were done. So it was to their satisfaction for the training. In terms of spatial orientation, this is the card rotation task. You see that looks like a letter B on the side. Their job was to decide which of the figures on the right were the same without flipping it, but just rotating it. So not lifting it up off the page, but just turning it. And you see the check marks there for the ones that are the same, as opposed to the unchecked ones are different. They are flipped. This was our 2-dimension mental rotation to assess spatial orientation. For spatial visualization, this was a paper folding task. There on the left, you see that rectangle with the dotted lines underneath. So the paper was folded up, and then a hole was poked through on the left side there. And it was their job to decide what the paper would look like when it was unfolded. You see the explanation underneath that it was the middle one that was the correct answer for that one. And there were 20 of these. So I hypothesized that working memory and visuospatial ability would be positively associated with physical activity and stage combat experience. What we found was a forward span in the movement-related memory, 5.6 movements. So this would fit along with Cohen's Magical Mystery 4, right? So we might have been limited by the episodic buffer there, where this was a more complex task. It was not associated with physical activity, nor with stage combat experience. For the reverse span, we did see a lower number. So the working memory, the reverse span was more difficult, which is good. Not everybody showed this trend, but overall the sample did show this trend. 5.42 movements, and there were not associations here. For the forward digit spans, this is the language-related memory. We saw an average of 7.08 digits, fits very nicely with Miller's magic number of 7 plus or minus 2. There was not an association for physical activity or for stage combat experience. The reverse span, it was a little lower with 6.5 digits and no statistically significant associations. The card rotation score, their average was 143 out of 160. There may have been some ceiling effects going on here because one of them got a perfect score and 2 of them were right near the very top. These folks did very well on the card rotation score, the 2-dimensional mental rotation. We did not see an association with physical activity or with stage combat experience. For the paper folding, they showed an average score of 13.67 out of a possible 20, just above half there, without statistically significant associations. So taking a look at this, we did see associations between movement-related memory with itself, right? Short-term and working. The language, we also saw this nice green square here. We saw associations between movement-related memory and our spatial abilities. And we saw that the spatial abilities were associated with each other. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. We did see this trend toward a negative association on language short-term memory with experience in dance. So the dancers may have fatigued themselves with working with the movement. They might have tried a little bit harder. This is, I mean, entirely speculation, but, and then did a little bit worse on the language short-term memory. So none of these hypotheses were supported in this sample. Now we can talk about well-being. So well-being is the ability to cope with stressors in order to overcome disease. I was specifically interested in health-related quality of life, which is a person's self-perception of their health. And I'll break down how that was measured here in a little bit. Symptoms of depression, because there is a high prevalence of depression in the US. Some estimates are 30 to 40% of depression. This is also closely associated with chronic stress. So folks who are stressed out might show more symptoms of depression. And stress overall is an underlying factor here toward well-being. So our example, this is from the SF36, that health-related quality of life, that first thing of interest. So this had a scope of the past 4 weeks. How much time has your physical health or emotional problems interfered with your social activities? And you decide on a Likert type scale there. There are 36 items here. This is transformed into 8 scales. So we have the scales. This is not important to know. Okay. Physical functioning, physical activity as it affects your role or your work, bodily pain, social functioning, mental health, emotional health as it affects your role, vitality, and general health. Of these 8, we then transform them. They are normalized to the US population and weighted so that they spit out these 2 composite scores. So we have a physical composite score and a mental composite score that is derived from this SF36. And those were the variables of interest, was the PCS and the MCS. In the US population, the average should be 50. That's what it's been normalized to. And the standard deviation is 10. So any 1 point difference from 50 represents 1/10 of a standard deviation. Now you can see these dates are a little old. So this data is all from 1993. So it's normalized to the US population of 1993. For depressive symptoms, we use the I use the PHQ-9. 9 because each question is related directly to the 9 symptoms of depression as listed in the DSM-5 from the American Psychiatric Association. So over the last 2 weeks, how often have you been bothered by any of the following problems? And there's a list of 9. Answers to each of these are not at all, to nearly every day, a score of 1 to 4. Or 0 to 4. Yes, 0 to 3. That's what it is, 0 to 3. So they could have a high score here of 27 if they were super depressed. With the chronic stress, I use the perceived stress scale. This has 14 items on a Likert scale of 0 to 4. So a high score of 56. In the last month, how often have you been upset because of something that happened unexpectedly? In the last month, how often have you felt nervous and stressed? Those sort of questions. So I hypothesized that health-related quality of life would be positively associated with physical activity and stage combat experience and negatively associated with those depressive symptoms and perceived stress. What we found was the physical composite score, right? The norm should be 50. These folks were just above that at 51.35, so that's a good thing. We saw a trend toward association between physical activity and the physical composite score. This makes some sense, right? If they feel like they are more active, they probably think that they are physically more healthy. We did not see an association with stage combat experience here. For the mental composite score, this was quite low at 44.22. We are going through a global pandemic, and active combatants were disproportionately affected. These are gig workers, folks who rely on the entertainment industry. So they've been out of work for some time or have changed industries. They might have experienced some stress because of that. We did not see an association with physical activity. We did see an association here with stage combat experience, where folks who had more experience, so seasoned active combatant, were better able to cope. They had a higher mental composite score. For the PHQ-9, we had an average of 6 out of 27. In terms of how this breaks down, it's been recommended that there are some categories here that would be mild depressive symptoms at a 6. Okay, it goes from mild to moderate to severe at 5, 10, and 15. And then we saw a trend toward an association with physical activity and no association with stage combat experience. For the perceived stress scale, we saw 23.04 out of 56. So this is right or just under half of the possible stress that they could have reported, with no associations here with the main variables. So how this one broke down, it lit up green. This was kind of fun to look at. We've got this corner down here has all of these measures associated with each other. This is good because this is also reflected in the literature. It has been found that the PSS, PHQ-9, and the mental composite scores have all factored heavily on each other. So this is a good thing. And then perceived stress with the physical composite score. We saw that negative association there. So they felt like they were healthier physically. They had experienced less stress, possibly. The 2-minute push-up score, like I mentioned before, was associated with the physical composite score. Now, this may have been a little bit influenced by our testing, right? We did the push-up score early on, and then later on, we did this health-related quality of life. So if they did more push-ups, they might have felt better about themselves and then reported better on the PCS. But this could be a true association too. With the mental composite score, we saw that association with stage combat experience, which is promising, right? Those seasoned actors were better able to cope, and some trends here. What I want to focus on a little bit is these bright green columns here. If they were seasoned actors, so this length of experience in acting was associated with better health-related quality of life, less stress, and less depressive symptoms. So there may have been a protective factor of experience in acting here, where these folks may have developed more resilience. They may have been better able to cope, either based on their age or on their experience as actors. This is also true for any movement discipline. So people who moved a lot were better able to deal with the pandemic, potentially. Right, I think that's what I wanted to say about that slide. So remind you of the hypotheses here. We saw a trend toward an association with physical activity and health-related quality of life. There was an association between stage combat experience and health-related quality of life. A trend with physical activity and depressive symptoms. No association there. And no association with perceived stress. So now we get to talk about what this all means. Here we have all of our everything lined up against those possible predictors. So what I expected to see was this column and this column to be bright green. That was my hypotheses, right? What we found was not that. It's possible that these folks had already realized as much benefit from physical activity as they could, right? Remember, they were 18 times the US physical guidelines. So if there was a benefit to be found, they might have already reached it. For stage combat, this was not a varied sample, right? These were experts. If this were my a priori question, I would have had a wider range of experience recruited, definitely from that friend up through the fight masters if possible, if they had met my other inclusion-exclusion criteria, right? We might have seen an association then. But we did see that association with the mental composite score, which was promising. And then talking about how they were associated with how our outcome measures were associated with each other. So simple and choice reaction time were associated. This is not surprising. I would expect this full box here to be bright green. A lot of it was, we did see associations, but we did not see an association between language-related short-term memory and movement-related short-term memory. So it's very possible that this didn't load as heavily on language as I would have predicted. When I learned dance, Janice told me if you can say it, you can do it. So I put words to everything that I did when I was trying to learn new movements. These folks, on average, probably didn't engage in that sort of strategy. They might have used different strategies there. For the language-related working memory and movement-related working memory were not associated. We saw associations and trends toward associations between working and short-term across those different domains. We did see associations between movement-related memory and our spatial ability. This is really interesting and kind of exciting because I didn't see this elsewhere in the literature yet. That spatial ability would be associated with movement-related memory specifically. So there's likely a factor of that spatial ability on movement-related memory. This would require more testing to see if there's a true relationship here, but this is promising initial results. The spatial ability measures were associated, and like I mentioned before, this bottom right corner lit up bright green for me. So to remind you of all our hypotheses, physical activity was associated with upper body muscular endurance. These other associations were not found. We saw a trend toward an association between physical activity and health-related quality of life. We did see an association between stage combat experience and health-related quality of life. A trend toward physical activity on depressive symptoms, and no associations there. So what did we learn? I found out that African combatants are physically active. This is a very active sample. Not terribly surprising, but good that it was that thought was validated here with our data. More physical activity was associated with the ability to do more push-ups. This is promising, especially in light of those findings from the modern dancers, right? Where there was not that association found, where for African combatants, at least, muscular endurance may be affected by physical activity. Stage combat experience was associated with a better self-perception of mental health. Movement and language-related memory are associated, but not as tightly as expected. Movement-related memory is associated with visuospatial ability. Like I said, this one was really quite exciting. And seasoned actors and movers might be better equipped to handle stress, as evidenced by this data from our during a global pandemic. And we found out that African combatants are stressed during a global pandemic. So I kept it to Miller's magic number of 7 here for this slide. Future directions will be more studies along this vein as I work toward that PhD in kinesiology with a minor in neuroscience here at Iowa State University. I'm working on the SPARKS-3 clinical trial, which is a phase 3 clinical trial looking at Parkinson's disease and exercise. It's a treadmill study, and I'm serving as the exercise interventionist. I currently hold a teaching assistantship for KIN 372 motor control. And in terms of service, I'm serving as the instructor for boxing outreach for people with Parkinson's disease. I plan to continue training with the Society of American Fight Directors. I'm currently an active combatant. I'd like to become an advanced active combatant, like the folks that I studied here, and a certified teacher. I'll continue my work as a professional fight choreographer. I'm currently working on As You Like It at Simpson College. That goes up the weekend before Thanksgiving, so if you want to see a show, go check it out. I'm also have on the docket the Children's Theater Workshop at North Scott High School and the Iowa High School Thespian Festival. And I do plan to present workshops at the Kennedy Center American College Theater Festival Region 5 again this year. I'll continue on after the PhD for a postdoctoral fellowship. I don't know where that is yet, but we'll find it closer to the end of the PhD. And then a career in teaching, research, and stage combat. I need to make some acknowledgements here. Primarily, I need to thank my wife and kids. We got Sam here, Charlotte and Oliver for their unconditional love and support. Without them, I wouldn't be able to do this. So thank you very much. I also need to thank my committee. You folks gave me some mentorship and guidance throughout this process, so thank you. I especially need to thank Dr. Elizabeth Stegemuller for her imagination and courage in accepting a theater kid into a science lab. I need to thank the folks in the lab. We've got 2 of them here today. But I especially need to thank our undergraduate researchers, Megan Salestad and Mariah White, who helped me with scoring this data and getting it ready for data analysis, as well as the brave souls who helped me to pilot my protocols. I want to thank the rest of my friends and family, especially my brothers and my parents. They helped keep me fed and entertained, and more importantly, my wife and kids fed and entertained while I was writing and doing research. And thank you to the theater and stage combat communities of which I've been a part. So I'm happy to share these slides with anybody who wants them. Fight kindly, my friends.
Questions from the
Folks online, you may unmute yourself or throw it in the chat if you have a question. Oh. Thank you. Thank you. All right, I'll go ahead and stop sharing, stop recording. Dad, thanks for coming. Ian, thank you. Good to see you. I'll talk with you guys later. Thanks.